Good afternoon. This is absolutely such a treat for me to be speaking with one of my heroes. So it's a great honor to be with Ethan, who I've watched dance over the years. And I think what we'll do, Ethan, is just start by me giving a little rundown of just like bullet points of your career. Of course, it's just a tiny window into this extraordinary career you're still in the midst of, but your performing days are pretty much not happening because dancers, as we know, well, we'll get to that. But Ethan was born in 1973 in Tyrone, Pennsylvania. He started his training at 8 years old with his sister. His mother took his sister and Ethan to gymnast class first, and then ballet classes, because she didn't want to leave Ethan alone at home, because when she came home, she thought he would have just completely wreaked havoc with football or baseball, whatever.
A lot of broken furniture.
A lot of broken furniture. Yes. So Ethan and his sister went off to gym class and then to ballet class. And he started studying Madison, Wisconsin, then Milwaukee Ballet School, Central Pennsylvania Youth Ballet, before going to the School of American Ballet. And of course, the minute everybody sort of saw Ethan, he was put into a special class where he was working beside Nureyev and Baryshnikov and Buhonis. So he had this very extraordinary experience of watching these legendary dancers as you were working out at the bar, I think. Yep. So then Ethan joins the corps of New York City Ballet in 1989. He leaves in 1982. He takes a little leave to go to the Zurich Ballet, and then he returns. Remember, he left as a corps member. He comes back as a soloist, and then a principal in 1995 of New York City Ballet. Then he did something shocking. He defected across the plaza, and he went and became a principal at American Ballet Theater, which in those days, that was a defection. We'll talk about that. He retired, sadly for all of us, but then not sadly, in 2012 from American Ballet Theater. But in 2011, he became, from 2011 to 2014, he was the artistic director of the Royal New Zealand Ballet. Along the way, during all that time, he was a movie star. He starred in the film Center Stage in 2000, and then in 2 sequels to Center Stage. In Center Stage, he rode a motorcycle onto the stage with dancers. I just want to tell you, you might want to just YouTube that movie, just for that scene alone. Then he also starred in a film, 2007, Born to be Wild. What I didn't know, doing my research on Ethan, was that he's had 4 knee surgeries. He had 4 knee surgeries in 2 years. Now that means that he recovered from surgery, pushed himself, and then got injured again. So that's just a little tiny, I didn't even go into all the awards he's won and all the extraordinary guest artist appearances with companies all over the world. But I want to begin my questions with 2 truths about ballet. The first truth is that a ballet dancer's performing career is incredibly short when you think about careers in general. A lot of people, when a ballet dancer retires from performing, are just sort of getting up speed in their own careers, late 30s, maybe early 40s. And, but a ballet dancer has to reckon with the frailty of the body and how hard that body has been pushed. So that's one thing. The second thing that I've really been thinking about is that a ballet dancer cannot cut corners. We're in a world right now where there's lots of ambition, and there's social media, and people can, start an Instagram account, and they're a designer, because they are. Or they're an influencer, because they are. A ballet dancer, like a surgeon or a doctor, cannot cut corners. A ballet dancer has the most grueling training, I think. I mean, I just can't even imagine how you have to push yourself through pain and through repetition. The other thing is we're in a world where people don't like to spend time on things. They want instant success. They want instant fame. A ballet dancer may have a lot of dreams, but at the end of the day, it's really about pushing yourself. So what I want to start with is asking you, How do you feel the ballet world has changed for the dancer from the time you entered as a professional in 1989 to now? How do you see, or do you see changes in that life?
Well, I think firstly what hasn't changed is a little bit connected to what you were saying, which is the commitment, the sacrifice, probably resolving yourself to the fact that you're not going to get rich in the profession, but all of that hasn't changed. But I think what has changed around it slowly but surely is the support system for ballet dancers in terms of strength and conditioning. It used to be that to get better in ballet, you just did more ballet and more repetition, where I think now sports medicine, various things come into play to help strengthen your dancing, but then also strengthen muscles that you're not using, so you're much more balanced. So I would say the holistic element, so to speak, has changed quite a bit. Also then in terms of nutrition, making sure that you eat well and eat right, so it can be sustainable and you can be at peak performance, as well as then just the general approach and how to get people's best performances out of them. And I think everybody obviously is an individual, so you have to approach it differently for every person. But I think that way back in the day, it was really almost over-regimented in essence. And I have to say I've been fortunate. The people I've worked with, I think they've always allowed me to have my own voice or be inquisitive. But I do think just the general approach in the atmosphere in terms of who's in the front of the room and who's on the floor, it becomes more of a conversation and a dialogue. And I could see that subtly changing over the years that I was a dancer.
Do you think that it's a great advantage to have a gymnast training in your background if you're a ballet dancer? Is that a big plus?
I think so. I wouldn't know exactly for myself because I just went out and studied gymnastics, and then all of a sudden really just found myself in ballet. Not because the first time I was in class that it was my calling, but I'd have to think so. I was pretty good at the rings, evidently. That's what my mom said. So I guess from what I remember, it was fairly grueling in terms of strength and your core. To do whatever planks in between that. But I think then probably tumbling and so on, just kind of making sure that your internal gyroscope is not only there, but to do things sideways or in a sense flipping, not necessarily exactly like gymnasts, but just having that sensibility, I think, is something good.
I feel, and maybe I'm really wrong, it's just the way that Balanchine dances and Jerome Robbins and Justin Peck, all these dances, the traditional ones, are danced with much more muscularity and much more, I often am holding my breath because I think some of the choreography is so dangerous. Like if you miss somebody coming into your arms backwards, or you're twirling someone in the air. I mean, and of course Balanchine was doing this years ago, and Jerry Robbins was, but do you think that it's much more kind of athletic now, the dancing of ballet dancers?
Well, I think all of those things I spoke about before in terms of, again, the physicality. I think the technique is just always going onwards and upwards. In essence, the science of ballet, which I would be remiss in saying that's not the only point. Obviously, that's one of the components to being a great artist or dancer is the science of it, or the physicality. There's all of the other things that come into play. But I would look back now, and I was pre-social media. It was still, you were lucky if you were filmed for a DVD of a live performance or something like that. It wasn't necessarily so instant. And I would look at those if they came across performances that I had done then, and even 5 years later, I think you could see the next generation taking on extraordinary things. So yeah, just trying to keep up for a period of time there.
How did you have your career planned out in advance, or were you kind of, as it went on, did you think, you know, you were offered obviously this incredible position as artistic director, but what prepared you for that role, which is so different, I would think, from a performing role?
Well, if I could go back like
absolutely.
a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
So I mean, I go back to the fact that I got involved in ballet because of my sister, so that certainly wasn't planned.
Right.
I just had a lot of energy and was very physical, as you mentioned, playing games in the house. So I went and sat in the lobby of a dance school in a strip mall in Monona, a suburb of Madison, Wisconsin. And ultimately then I got started, but that wasn't something where I went, okay, this is,
right.
Whereas my wife at age 4 was like,
right.
this is it. And, you know,
right.
Gillian Murphy has
right.
obviously become a wonderful artist.
I forgot to mention your marriage to Gillian Murphy, a principal at American Ballet Theater, who is an extraordinary dancer, and you just had your first son this year, so yes. This is very exciting. Yay. Didn't mean to leave that out.
But I'll try and be brief, but
no,
just to answer the unplanned, basically, evolution of my career was starting at that moment. And then I actually had quit ballet at 14. I was going to go into wrestling, not like WWE or WWF, whatever that is at the moment, but and running, because those were two things that were important to me. And my dad was a prison warden for the federal system, and so he was transferred to the Manhattan Correctional Center, which is downtown by Police Plaza. I had been at School of American Ballet the summer before, had gotten a scholarship, so essentially I was pulled back in to ballet, and that's when the penny dropped, as you're describing, to be at the School of American Ballet with Baryshnikov, Bahonis, Nureyev, taking class. Next to a pimple-faced little dude. I was like extremely inspired and said to myself, this is what I want to do. At that time then, Baryshnikov started the School of Classical Ballet, so I went to a summer course there, went back to SAB for the year, decided that American Ballet Theater was where I wanted to be, because in Wisconsin, American Ballet Theater has been a touring company. Right. And so I think it was in Minnesota that we saw them perform, and City Ballet wasn't necessarily touring that much. So that was always in the back of my mind. So I decided to then go to the School of Classical Ballet full-time. And within the first week, Mikhail Baryshnikov left the company, and the school was instantaneously disbanded. Mm. So I went back with my tail between my legs to the School of American Ballet, saying, you know, well, could I please come back? And my parents certainly didn't have the means to pay for an education, and so could I also have my scholarship? And fortunately, they said yes. And a week later, I was invited to join the company. So that's just a little bit
that's great.
Of a look into how unplanned the whole thing has been, and then, if we speak about my departure or my defection, as you put it.
Well, talk a little bit about that. What prompted you to make that move?
Well, I suppose now looking back on, I'm not sure if it really resonated at the time with me, but I guess American Ballet Theater was always in the back of my mind as somewhere that I wanted to dance, because the repertoire at New York City Ballet is quite different, even though we're speaking the same language. It's just with a different accent. And so that was always there. And I think Peter Martins, who was the director at the time, knew it, because sometimes he would come up to me, you know, and say, you see, you made the right choice, being at New York City Ballet. But after 6 years, I guess, and really reinforcing your point, the career being short, I felt that I wanted to do as much as I could with this body and mind and spirit. And so I spoke with Peter and said, you know, is there any way I could, let's say, have my cake and eat it too? staying with New York City Ballet, but pursuing some of the repertoire, not even American Ballet Theater specifically, but the classics, the Swan Lakes,
Right.
the Giselles, and so on. And he said, let me think about it. And long story short, basically it was, you need to be here,
Right.
full-time, fully
Right.
committed,
Right.
or that's that. And fully respect that. And so I said, well, I do respect that. So I'll be leaving the company at the end of the year. So no plans. I didn't have a job, nothing. I just said, this is something I need to do, call it brave or stupid. And then just kind of miraculously, and I guess to date myself further, I've already mentioned DVDs. I get a phone call on the 3rd floor of the New York State Theater, which is now the Koch Theater, and it's Michael Kaiser, the executive director of American Ballet Theater, and he says, hello, Ethan. You know, I'm wondering if you would come and guest with American Ballet Theater, basically a year from now. This was in the spring,
Right.
for the Met season. And he was like, and you know, we can work it out if you have your obligations with New York City Ballet and all of that. And nobody knew, it wasn't public at that
Right.
point. And I said, well, actually, I'm looking for a job, so that works out pretty well. So that's how it all started. And again, as I guess as unplanned as it could be.
That's so incredible. I hadn't realized that little moment, that little window there. But then tell me about the artistic director, because I would imagine that position entails a lot of, bureaucratic work, fundraising. I mean, things that you probably had not done before.
Yes, I think that, I firstly kind of looking at things outside of the performing career, was always compelled and very interested and inspired to teach. I had great teachers and coaches growing up who I owe a lot to in terms of any success that I've had in my career. And was just always kind of fascinated with that. And also then taking that and, let's say, modulating it to be relevant to the technique we were talking about. That's always changing and becoming
Yes.
more and more virtuosic.
Yes.
So that's where I started, and through that then I was able to run a summer course on Martha's Vineyard, which gave me a really minute
Yeah.
insight, but just some basics of budgets and planning, scheduling, all of that, organizing. And so that was kind of my first taste into that. Then I became a dean at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, where I would say in deference in a way to the setup of an executive director, artistic director. Being dean, you're kind of both. Mm-hmm. And I learned a heck of a lot, about things I never thought I would learn.
Right.
State funds versus, whatever, this code and judicial policies and so on. So that was very administrative intensive, but I always tried to keep the creative element alive and be in the studio at the same time, which I think is where I'm the happiest and where I have the most to offer, where there's other people who are certainly better adept and have more ability to manage the other
Well,
things.
talk a little bit about the transition into choreography, because choreography is a mystery to me. It's like you might as well be watching someone teach people to walk on the moon. I just am so amazed by how dancers learn choreography. And how do you begin to realize a ballet? Do you see it in your head? Where do you begin?
Well, I'm still figuring it out, so I can't say that I'm a master of it by any means. I think there's different processes at different times. Another this thing where it wasn't planned, and I didn't think. I really thought, okay, maybe more involved as an artistic director or a teacher, coach, that type of thing. But choreography, I really didn't have that compulsion. Until I think about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I was at the School of the Arts in North Carolina and decided to restage the Nutcracker. And I'd done some little things here and there, and I just found that, it was really extremely rewarding and fulfilling, and I'd like to think that I have a unique kind of perspective and something to offer. But I thought, well, you know what, this is really something that's speaking to me at this point. So Then from that point on, just in certain cases listening to music and so on and so forth, and just images or ideas would pop into my head. And in certain cases then I was able to bring those to life, which is one reason why I was the director in New Zealand, because I was able to mount some full-length ballets, but also make some brand new creations. But it really does vary. Sometimes it's hearing the music and I'm like, okay, yeah, that's something I can see what's happening on the stage, from either characters to movement, or it could be a personality, like Doc Holliday, something like that, where I don't have any music, but just someone or something basically inspires. But at the root of it all, the music is primary at the end of the day, whichever comes first or last.
I watched you work with your dancers at the Guggenheim this past years, and that was really fascinating because I watched you watching them, and so there's the step, and I think in one interview you said the clean lines of ballet are always like the best. I mean, there are these
clean never goes out of style.
Clean never goes out of style.
My mom would agree too. Many years of therapy to get through that. No, squeegeeing the shower and vacuuming my way out of rooms. No, it's like.
But then you also said at the same time that it is the moments between the movements where I guess the dancer can really bring their personality. Oh, well, they're bringing it all the time, of course, but talk about what that means to you, that moment from.
I think I know what you're talking about. Yes, I mean, I think firstly the connectivity, whether you're actually doing something or not, maybe is what I was speaking to, and that I think is influenced by Bushido, which is basically silence is strength in repose. So I'm kind of a big believer in that. A good example would be Albrecht's entrance in the second act, where he simply, which the first time I did it, or just before, seemed like it was endless, but basically just walking and doing nothing.
Yeah.
But it can be very strong and very powerful if you're exuding the right persona or energy. So I think that sometimes people think they always have to be moving or doing something, and I just like to, and I see that with my students all the time. I just like to say, actually, it's quite powerful in that sense. That silence is strength and repose, which I didn't make that up, but I think is very beautiful.
It's very beautiful, but also, I mean, I must say that when dancers are on stage, you are definitely drawn to certain dancers, and there's a power coming out of them, and there's a star power that you can't deny. I wouldn't think that's something you can teach a student. That is something innately that the person perhaps is connecting to their strength and also to their will to keep doing this difficult thing, because I mean, with you reached the height of the heights, and I just am fascinated with what drives a dancer to be like the best and a star. It's like, I suppose it's like an actor. I mean, there's a certain power within.
Well, the first part of what you're saying, I'll just touch on that briefly, and in my teaching, coaching, whether it would be with professional students, those who are kind of in the bridge, like our studio company, I call them prodents. They're half professional, half students. They're not quite there yet, but they're not students, so it's different. But I would say the one thing that's consistent is that yes, I can't teach them that, but what I can do is open it up and let them know that they should ultimately have the freedom to make choices, and you're going to learn from it. I mean, not all of them will be good.
Right.
But certainly if you keep learning and evolving, whatever it may be, that you have to take that risk to change companies, to do a role in a different way, and be true to yourself. And so I think that if I can convey that, and especially in our work together, let them know that this space is a place to explore that and to take the risks, that is one of the best things that I can offer, not to become a mimic of anybody else, or just to be, let's say, shackled by tradition, but to leap forward from it with your own perspective, which I think is what makes an exceptional and a true artist to have their own voice. So then, getting back to it for myself, I don't know. I have to say, certainly the career for me, I had a certain amount of confidence, let's say, that I think would come across, and that you have to a certain point, but as well, equally, I think vulnerability and being open, in a way, being vulnerable, not being crushed by it, you know. I mean, I have doubts and insecurities and live with them every day, but certainly as a performer, because you're out there doing something you love, that has the utmost importance. Right. And also for me, I can't speak for all artists, but for a good period of time, it was how I, in a way, measured my success as a human being. I mean, not exclusively, but let's say to a certain extent, value. I don't mean being a good person. I mean, certainly that's important, but just kind of like, okay, who I am and my sense of self was tied to whether the show the night before went well or didn't go well. I think that there's always been a little bit, perhaps, competitive drive in a positive way. When I joined American Ballet Theater, was surrounded by Jose Manuel Carreño, Julio Boca, etc. I mean, the principles. It was major. I think what was so great was that we all understood we were not the same or competing, in the sense that we're all different. Yes. So it's an exercise in futility to try and be better than the other person, and so kind of that competitive camaraderie, I think, was something that was palpable, and I would hope, whether it was from me influencing or something others work, but that we learned from each other and elevated the whole game. That's such a beautiful thing to say, and I'm sure you say it to your students. You're really competing with yourself. You're not competing with, because you can only bring your value to that incredible role. That's very profound, I think. I feel that the arts in our American culture are sort of sideswiped a little bit. I feel that patronage we are so lucky for the amazing patrons that contribute to the arts and support the arts. Have you felt that, I mean, the arts are everything, I think. But do you feel heartened that there is great support for the arts and that people understand, like in school curriculums, dance is not and movement in general is not, it's not a frivolous thing, it's a very fundamental thing for students to engage in artistic, whatever it is. Do you feel heartened today? Sometimes. I do feel heartened. I would suppose that I think there's a lot of work to do. And certainly it's going to be an eternal struggle, in essence, but that's part of it, becoming an artist. It is. But all kidding aside, I think that when I became a dean and a director, and I really had to articulate, on a more consistent basis, just kind of the importance of art, not just within the organizations that I was working with, but to the communities, and how that translated just into a better society, which sounds, maybe like I'm waxing poetic, but I do firmly believe in that. And I think that even if you look historically, whether they were on the good side or the bad side, art was always seen as one of the most important commodities for a good reason, because it really is something that I think you can judge, or you can measure. Let's say, not judge, but measure a great, well-rounded civilization by. In dance, more specifically, I mean, my son, who's 4.5 months old, he can't talk now, but he can move. Right. And he can express himself through that movement, and we communicate and express ourselves through that. So, in essence, as elite, not elitist, but as elite as the art form is, because it's so special. I'm not saying it's not inclusive. I'm just saying elite, not elitist. But it comes from a very primal and visceral place, which, again, then, if you put that together with what it may mean in terms of economy, enlightenment, reaching, healing, gathering, communication, especially in a social media age in terms of we're all here in this room.
Yep.
And thank you for staying to listen to what I have to say. But if you put that together then with the most basic thing, which is, before you can talk, you're actually communicating with your body.
Well, before I open this is my last question before I open to the audience, if they have any questions. Do you want to share with us any upcoming projects, events that we can look forward to? Share anything coming up?
I'm not sure there's any events other than just keeping it going with
well, that's the
American
best.
Ballet Theater. And,
yay, that's fantastic. That's really
good
news. Well, I know we've gone over our time. Richard said we could a little bit. But if there are any questions, do feel free to ask them. Yes?
In certain companies, you have principal dancers, and other ones you have, I don't know, what used to be called like the prima ballerina and so forth. I think the norm now is more to try and have a number of principal dancers. And so what does that do to the mindset of, there's obviously a level of competition between people who want to get these positions. So now you're on the other hand, you're the choreographer.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you play that? Because it's a challenge, because you want to be fair, I'm sure, and so forth, but you obviously have a vision of what you want to see, so.
Right. Well, I mean, as in art in general, I guess it's subjective. So as a director, I mean, you are a little bit then at the what the taste might be of the director or the people, in terms of the team. I think that I would go back to your point earlier, which is why do you keep trying to get better? And I think as long as you keep focused on self-improvement and making sure that you were as good as you possibly could be. I'm not sure that I was. I look back and I go, okay, I could have been better in many ways if I had some of the resources we discussed earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, again, to go back to, and I would have said this throughout, when I became a soloist and then a principal dancer, certainly it's an achievement, it's an accomplishment, and the acknowledgement brings with it a lot of confidence, as well as, let's say, a certain degree of notoriety. But I would say whether you get into the studio company, whether you become a part of the corps de ballet, a soloist, or a principal dancer, I would use an analogy from, I studied a bit of martial arts, my Shihan Gurai, which is once you gain the black belt, that's when you start. So whether you're a principal dancer or a prima ballerina, whatever you want to call it, that, actually people think it's achievement to get a black belt, but that's actually when the work begins. So, not to be harsh, but like in the first day of studio coming in, like, congratulations, welcome, you've achieved nothing. No, I don't put it like that, but more motivational with that kind of spirit behind it.
Right. Fantastic. Well, on that note, we will adjourn. And thank you, Ethan, and thank you, Richard, for this opportunity, and all of you.